My parents announced they were selling my home to fund my sister's dream, expecting me to quietly pack my bags and disappear. They saw me as a minor obstacle. So, I just smiled and asked for their timeline, knowing that thanks to my grandfather's secret trust, I was about to give them the biggest reality check of their lives. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like the humidity of a mid-August evening. "We're selling the house," my father, Richard, announced. He said it with the same casual tone he used to declare we were out of milk. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed firmly on my younger sister, Sophie, whose face was illuminated with a triumphant glow that made my stomach churn. I had been feeling off all day, a low-grade headache and a persistent weariness that had settled deep in my bones. I'd chalked it up to a looming project deadline, but this news sent a different kind of chill through me, one that had nothing to do with being unwell. My mother, Diane, reached across the dinner table to pat Sophie's hand. Her smile was wide, indulgent, and completely oblivious to the fact that my world had just tilted on its axis. "It's the only way, sweetheart," she cooed. "A top-tier medical school costs a fortune, but you've earned it. We are so proud of you." Sophie, the eternal golden child, basked in the attention. "I just can't believe it's really happening," she breathed, her eyes shining. Thank you both so much." I watched the scene play out as if I were behind a pane of soundproof glass. The clinking of their forks against the ceramic plates, the murmur of their celebratory plans, it all seemed distant. They were a perfect, happy trio, plotting a bright future funded by the demolition of mine. They still hadn't addressed me directly. I was a ghost at their feast, a piece of furniture they had yet to figure out how to dispose of. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the bubble of their joy. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, their expressions ranging from my father's mild annoyance to my mother's impatient condescension. "What about me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I live here." Diane sighed, a long, theatrical sound of parental burden. "Rachel, don't be difficult. You're 26 years old. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet anyway. We've let you stay here rent-free for years while you work on your little projects." Her dismissal of my freelance graphic design career, the business I had painstakingly built from scratch in my small bedroom studio, was a familiar sting. To them, my stable income and growing client list were a hobby. Sophie's potential future as a doctor was the only career that mattered. "Selling the house is a huge decision," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where am I supposed to go?" "We'll help you find a small apartment," my father offered, though his tone suggested it would be more of a token effort. "You've been saving money, haven't you? This will be a good push for you. A little motivation." Motivation. They were taking my home, my stability, and my history and calling it motivation. They expected me to pack up my life, my business, my memories, and thank them for the opportunity. They saw the 4 walls around us as nothing more than a financial asset, a piggy bank to be smashed open for their favored daughter. But this house wasn't just 4 walls. It was Grandpa's house. He had built the extension himself, planted the old oak tree in the backyard, and filled the rooms with a sense of warmth and safety that had been my only refuge for years. And he had left it to me. That single, secret fact was a burning coal in my chest. A year ago, on my 25th birthday, a letter from his lawyer, Mr. Albright, had informed me of the irrevocable trust. My grandfather, a shrewd and perceptive man, had seen the dynamic in his own family. He had seen how my parents managed their finances and how they placed Sophie on a pedestal. He had taken steps to protect me, to give me a foundation they could never pull out from under me. I was the legal owner of this property. They just didn't know it yet. I looked at their expectant faces, waiting for me to argue, to cry, to have a tantrum they could later describe to their friends as typical Rachel. But I did none of those things. A strange, cold calm washed over me. The headache I'd had all day receded, replaced by a sharp, ringing clarity. They had just handed me all the justification I would ever need. I took a slow sip of water, placed the glass down deliberately, and met my mother's gaze. "Okay," I said. "When do I need to be out?" The simplicity of my question disarmed them. They had been prepared for a fight. Ought compliance. My father blinked, my mother's condescending smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and Sophie looked momentarily confused. They mistook my calmness for defeat. They couldn't have been more wrong. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a long-overdue lesson in consequences. And as I looked at the family who was so willing to discard me, I knew one thing for certain. The betrayal was worse than any diagnosis of illness. It was a sickness of the heart, and I was about to be the cure. I excused myself from the table, my uneaten dinner mocking me from the plate. The air in the dining room had become unbreathable, thick with my sister's triumph and my parents' casual cruelty. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I could hear their voices resume their cheerful planning, my swift departure already forgotten. The sound was a physical blow, reinforcing my status as an afterthought in my own home. My room, which also served as my office, had always been my sanctuary. The walls were covered in corkboards pinned with design proofs, color palettes, and sketches. My large monitor sat on a desk I'd bought with my first big freelance check. This was the space where I had built a life for myself, separate from the family dynamics that played out downstairs. Now, it felt like a temporary holding cell. I sank into my office chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a slow-burning anger. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the years of being made to feel secondary, of my ambitions being minimized while Sophie's were magnified and celebrated. I had paid for my own community college courses, worked 2 part-time jobs to help with bills when my dad was laid off, and never asked for a fraction of what was lavished on Sophie. The private tutors, the overseas summer programs, the brand new car for her 18th birthday. I had done all of this under the assumption that we were a family, and that my contributions, however small, mattered. Tonight had shattered that illusion. They didn't see my contributions. They saw a resource to be managed, and now, an obstacle to be removed. A light rap on my door was followed by my mother entering without waiting for an answer. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression one of strained patience. "I hope you're not going to be difficult about this, Rachel," she began, foregoing any pretense of concern. "Your father and I are already under a lot of stress. The last thing we need is drama." "You're selling my home and kicking me out. I think that qualifies as drama," I replied, my voice flat. "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "It's the family home, and the family has decided. Sophie has an incredible opportunity, and as her family, we need to support her. You should be happy for your sister." There it was, the foundational belief of our family. Rachel's feelings were an inconvenience. Sophie's dreams were a mandate. "I am happy for her," I said, and it was true. I didn't begrudge Sophie her acceptance into medical school. What I couldn't accept was the casual assumption that my life was disposable collateral. I just wish my future was considered part of the family's decision. "Your future is your own responsibility," Diane said sharply. "You're an adult. Frankly, this is for the best. It will force you to grow up." She smiled then, a thin, self-satisfied smile, as if she had just imparted some profound parental wisdom. "Just start looking at apartments, something small and affordable. We'll call a real estate agent tomorrow. Things are going to start moving very quickly." She turned to leave, her part in this uncomfortable conversation done. As she reached the door, I said one more thing. "And what if I don't want to leave?" She paused, her back still to me. "That would be very selfish of you, Rachel. Are you saying you would deny your own sister her future, all because you don't want the inconvenience of moving? I thought you were better than that." She didn't wait for my answer. She just closed the door behind her, leaving me in the suffocating silence. Her words were designed to shame me, to paint me as the villain of this story. For a moment, a sliver of doubt crept in. Was I being selfish? Then the image of my grandfather's face flashed in my mind. I remembered him sitting in the big armchair downstairs, the one my parents were so eager to sell, telling me stories about building this house. "A person needs a place to stand, Rachel," he'd said, his voice raspy with age. "A foundation, so no one can ever blow you over." He knew. He had seen this coming in one form or another. My anger solidified into resolve. They thought I was a pushover, a quiet doormat who would absorb their decision without a fight. They assumed they held all the power, all the cards. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They were playing a game in a house that wasn't theirs. The foundation my grandfather had given me was not just wood and concrete, but a legal document, sitting safely in a file in Mr. Albright's office. And they were about to find out just how solid it was. The days following the announcement were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. My parents and Sophie operated as a seamless unit, their excitement for the future casting a long, dismissive shadow over me. They spoke of the house in the past tense, as if its sale were already a done deal. My mother would walk through the rooms, pointing out features to highlight for potential buyers. "The original hardwood floors are in excellent condition," she'd say to my father, completely ignoring me as I sat working at the kitchen table. "And the garden will be a huge selling point." My garden, the one I had spent the last 3 summers cultivating, turning a patch of weeds into a vibrant sanctuary of herbs and flowers. It was where I went to clear my head after long hours staring at a screen. To her, it was just another asset to be liquidated. My father, for his part, adopted a tactic of paternal disappointment. Whenever he caught my eye, he would sigh heavily, as if my very presence was a burden. "Rachel," he said one afternoon, finding me in the living room, "your mother tells me you're not even looking at rental listings. You're not making this easy." "Making what easy?" I asked, looking up from my laptop. "The process of being made homeless." "Nobody is making you homeless," he said, his voice rising in frustration. "We are providing for your sister. That is what families do. They make sacrifices." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I thought back to when I was 19. I'd been accepted into a decent 4-year university with a small scholarship, but the remaining tuition was still significant. At the same time, Sophie, who was 17, had been selected for a competitive and very expensive summer ballet program in New York. There was no discussion, no debate. "We can only afford one big thing right now," my mother had declared. "And Sophie's program is a once-in-a-lifetime chance." So I'd stayed home and enrolled in community college, working evenings at a diner to pay for it myself and to help with the household bills, which were always tight. I never once complained. I bought into the narrative of family sacrifice. The problem, I now realized, was that the sacrifices were only ever expected from me. My role was to give things up. Sophie's was to receive them. Sophie was perhaps the most complex part of the equation. She wasn't overtly malicious like my mother. Instead, she cloaked her entitlement in a layer of sweet, feigned innocence. She floated through the house on a cloud of self-importance, discussing her future medical career in exhaustive detail. She would corner me while I was trying to work, showing me glossy brochures of student housing near her campus, oblivious to the cruel irony. "Look at this one, Ratch," she said, pointing to a tiny, sterile-looking dorm room. "It's so cool. You should find a place like this. We could be apartment buddies, just in different cities." Her insensitivity was so profound it bordered on the absurd. She genuinely couldn't comprehend that her dream was being built on the rubble of mine. In her mind, the house was just a pile of money, and since she needed the money more, her claim was stronger. The fact that I had lived here my entire life, that it was my home and my workplace, was irrelevant. The primary antagonist in all of this, however, was my mother, Diane. She was the architect of this plan and the enforcer of the family hierarchy. She viewed her 2 daughters through entirely different lenses. Sophie was a reflection of all her own unfulfilled ambitions, a future doctor, prestigious and respected. I, with my quiet, creative, and self-employed career, was a disappointment. A freelance graphic designer wasn't something she could brag about at her book club meetings. "You have to understand, Rachel," she told me during another one of her one-sided talks, A career like yours doesn't offer long-term security. There's no pension, no big corporate ladder. Selling the house to invest in Sophie is the smartest financial decision for this family's future. This family's future. She meant her future, vicariously lived through Sophie. My security didn't factor into the equation. It was a chilling and clarifying realization. They were not just overlooking me, they were actively devaluing my life to elevate Sophie's. I listened to it all, my father's sighs, my sister's thoughtless chatter, my mother's lectures on sacrifice. And with every word, the small, flickering flame of my anger grew into a steady, controlled fire. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I simply nodded, gave noncommittal answers, and retreated to my room. They mistook my silence for acquiescence. They thought they were winning. They had no idea that I had already won. They just hadn't been informed of their defeat yet. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to the sound of my mother on the phone in the hallway, her voice sharp and businesslike. "Yes, Friday at 10 a.m. would be perfect," she said. "The house has great bones, and we're very motivated sellers." Motivated sellers. The phrase echoed in my mind. The detached, clinical way she spoke about erasing my entire world was the final push I needed. The passive hurt I had been nursing curdled into a firm, unshakable resolve. I was done being a spectator to the dismantling of my life. It was time to act. My first step was to close my laptop, push aside the design project I was working on, and walk out of my room with a purpose I hadn't felt in days. I bypassed the kitchen where my mother was now humming and went straight out the front door, my car keys in hand. I needed to see Mr. Albright. His law office was in a quiet, older part of town, housed in a modest brick building that smelled of old books and strong coffee. Mr. Albright had been my grandfather's lawyer for over 40 years, and more than that, he had been his friend. He was a kind, sharp-eyed man with a no-nonsense demeanor that I had always found comforting. When I was ushered into his office, he stood to greet me with a warm, sad smile. "Rachel, I've been expecting you," he said gently. "I received a call yesterday from a real estate agent asking for a preliminary title check on your address. I told them my client hadn't authorized any such check. I imagine that client is you." Relief washed over me. "They're moving so fast," I said, sinking into the leather chair opposite his desk. "My parents are planning to sell the house to pay for Sophie's medical school. They told me I have to move out." Mr. Albright leaned back, his fingers steepled. He wasn't surprised. "Your grandfather was a very wise man, Rachel. He foresaw this. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the dynamic. He worried that your father's pliable nature and your mother's ambitions would one day put you in a precarious position." He swiveled his chair to a large filing cabinet and pulled out a thick accordion folder with my name on it. "Let's review," he said, opening it on the desk. "The property at 123 Oak Street was placed into an irrevocable trust upon your grandfather's passing. He is the grantor, I am the trustee, and you are the sole beneficiary. The terms are explicit. The trust was to be managed by me until your 25th birthday, at which point the deed of ownership for the property was to be transferred directly and exclusively into your name. That transfer was legally executed and filed with the county clerk's office on the day you turned 25, just over a year ago." He slid a document across the desk. It was the official deed. My name was there, printed in bold, undeniable letters, Rachel M. Connolly. "You are the 100% legal owner of that house," Mr. Albright stated, his voice firm. "Your parents are, in legal terms, tenants. They have no right to sell it, list it, or even promise it to anyone. They are living there by your good grace, whether they know it or not." Seeing the proof in my hands, the official seal, my name, was like inhaling pure oxygen after being underwater for too long. This was real. This was my foundation. "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Do I just show them this?" "You could," he said, observing me carefully. "Or you could let them proceed a little further down this path they've chosen. Sometimes a lesson is more effective when it arrives at the most inopportune moment for the student. A sly twinkle appeared in his eyes, and I saw a glimpse of the shrewd friend my grandfather had trusted for so many years. A plan began to form in my mind, a clever trap built not of malice, but of their own making. "They've scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent," I said, a newfound confidence in my voice. "This Friday, at the house." Mr. Albright smiled. An excellent opportunity for a clarification of ownership. I spent the next hour with him, going over every detail. He made copies of the deed, the relevant pages of the trust, and a letter he drafted on his official letterhead, summarizing the legal reality of the situation in plain, unequivocal language. He placed them all in a crisp manila envelope. "This is your ammunition," he said, handing it to me. "Use it wisely." As I walked out of his office and back into the bright afternoon sun, the heavy weight on my shoulders had lifted. I was no longer a victim of their plans, I was the architect of my own. They thought they were selling a house to fund a future. They had no idea they were about to be foreclosed on by the past. The investigation was over. It was time to prepare for the confrontation. The next 2 days were a strange and tense performance. I went about my work, kept to myself, and answered my family's questions with a placid calm that they found deeply unsettling. My compliance had been confusing to them, but my newfound silence was unnerving. They had expected tears and arguments, a dramatic display they could manage. My quiet composure was a variable they hadn't planned for, and it was clear they didn't know what to make of it. The preliminary confrontation I had been waiting for came not from my parents, but from Sophie. She found me in the garden on Thursday afternoon, the day before the real estate agent was due to arrive. I was trimming the lavender bushes, the familiar scent usually a comfort, but today it only sharpened my focus. "Hey," she said, hovering awkwardly by the back door. She was dressed in new clothes, likely purchased in anticipation of her new life as a med student. "Hey, Sophie," I replied without turning around. She drifted closer, wandering among the flower beds. "So, are you okay? You've been really quiet." "I'm fine," I said, snipping a dead branch with satisfying finality. "It's just, Mom and Dad are worried," she continued, her voice laced with a rehearsed sincerity. "They think you're angry, but you have to know this isn't personal. It's just the best thing for the family." I finally turned to look at her. "The best thing for your part of the family, you mean?" Sophie flinched, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before being replaced by her customary mask of gentle concern. "That's not fair, Rachel. We've supported you for years. Letting you live here, follow your art passion, now it's my turn. I thought you'd be happy for me." "I am happy you got into medical school, Sophie," I said, my voice even. "I'm not happy that you and Mom and Dad think my life is the appropriate tuition fee." She sighed, the sound a perfect imitation of our mother's exasperated sigh. "You're being so dramatic, it's just a house. You can get an apartment. I don't see what the big deal is." This was the moment. I hadn't planned it, but her complete and utter lack of empathy presented the perfect opening. It was time to plant the first seed of doubt. "Don't worry about me, Sophie," I said, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "I'll be fine. In fact, I have my own plans for this house." The statement hung in the air between us. It was just vague enough to be dismissed, but just specific enough to be alarming. Sophie's brow furrowed in confusion. "What does that mean? What plans?" "Just plans," I said, turning back to my lavender. "You focus on your school. I've got things handled here." She stood there for a long moment, watching me. I could feel her mind racing, trying to decipher my words. I had just introduced an unexpected wrinkle into their seamless narrative. I wasn't the defeated daughter packing her bags, I was a person with plans. Sophie went back inside, and I knew exactly where she was going. Less than 10 minutes later, my mother appeared at the back door, her expression stormy. "What did you say to your sister?" she demanded. "I told her not to worry about me," I answered truthfully. "She said you have plans for the house." "What plans? Rachel, don't you dare try to sabotage this. Your sister's future is on the line. My plans are my own, I said calmly, looking her directly in the eye. And I would think very carefully before you sign any contracts tomorrow. This was a more direct warning, and it landed with the force of a physical slap. My mother's face went from angry to suspicious. What are you talking about? What do you know? I know that this house has a lot of history, I said, choosing my words with care. And Grandpa always taught me to protect my foundation. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes at the mention of our grandfather. She knew how much he had adored me and how little he had trusted her and my father with practical matters. But she couldn't make the leap. The possibility that he would have gone so far as to legally cut them out of the equation was beyond her comprehension. To her, I was just being difficult, making vague, empty threats out of spite. Your grandfather is gone, she said dismissively. And this house is our only major asset. Don't play games, Rachel, you'll lose. She spun around and stormed back inside, the screen door slamming behind her. It was a satisfying sound. The trap wasn't fully sprung, but the bait had been taken. I had revealed just enough to create unease and confusion. Their confidence was shaken. They would now walk into that meeting tomorrow not with the swagger of certainty, but with a nagging question mark in the back of their minds. They thought my threat was emotional. They had no idea it was legal. The atmosphere in the house on Friday morning was thick with a toxic blend of feigned cheerfulness and palpable tension. My mother, Diane, was a whirlwind of nervous energy, wiping down already clean surfaces and fluffing pillows on the couch. My father, Richard, paced the living room, periodically peering out the front window. Even Sophie, usually so, self-assured, seemed on edge. My cryptic comments had clearly done their job, sowing just enough doubt to spoil their celebratory mood. They were treating me with a cautious, almost fearful politeness. At breakfast, my father had asked if I wanted more coffee 3 separate times. My mother kept shooting me sideways glances, trying to read my expression. They were like soldiers walking through a minefield, and I was the one who knew the map. I remained in my room, the manila envelope from Mr. Albright sitting on my desk like a sleeping predator. I could hear them downstairs, their hushed, anxious whispers floating up the stairs. Do you think she'd actually do something? My father worried. Do what? My mother snapped back. She has no legal leg to stand on. She's just being spiteful, trying to ruin Sophie's big day. We just need to ignore her and get through this meeting. Ignore me? That had always been their strategy. But ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. In this case, it was just letting the problem get its legal documents in order. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock. I heard my mother rush to answer it, her voice instantly transforming into a warm, welcoming coo. Brenda, so good to see you. Please come in. Brenda, the real estate agent, was a woman with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile. Her voice was professionally upbeat as she greeted my parents and Sophie. I listened from the top of the stairs as my mother began the tour, starting with the living room. As you can see, the natural light is just wonderful, Diane said, gesturing grandly. We've taken such good care of this place over the years. We're the original owners, you know. A lie, a small one, but a lie nonetheless. My grandparents were the original owners. This house was my mother's childhood home, a fact she conveniently forgot when it suited her narrative. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. The case was built, the evidence was in my hand, and the jury, a jury of one real estate agent, was assembled. It was time to present my irrefutable proof. I started down the stairs, my steps slow and deliberate. Each creak of the old wooden treads announced my arrival. They all turned to look, their conversation faltering. Brenda, the agent, offered me a polite, professional smile. My family just stared, their faces a mixture of dread and defiance. Rachel, my mother said, her voice tight. Brenda is just getting a feel for the house. We don't need to bother her. Oh, it's no bother at all, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I walked over to the agent and extended my hand. Hello, Brenda. My name is Rachel Connolly. It's a pleasure to meet you. You too, she said, shaking my hand. I turned my gaze to my parents. Mom, Dad, Sophie, I'm glad you're all here. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about the sale of this property. Rachel, not now, my father warned, his face flushing. Now is the perfect time, I countered, my voice hardening. Brenda, I'm afraid my parents have brought you here under false pretenses. While they do reside here, they are not the legal owners of this house. A stunned silence fell over the room. Brenda's professional smile froze on her face. Sophie gasped. My mother's face went white with rage. How dare you, Diane hissed. You're embarrassing us in front of a guest. You're embarrassing yourselves by trying to sell a property you don't own, I shot back. I opened the manila envelope and pulled out the crisp copies Mr. Albright had prepared. This, I said, holding up the official deed, is the title to 123 Oak Street. As you can see, it's in my name, and it has been for the past year. I handed the document to Brenda, whose eyes widened as she scanned the page. Her professional demeanor cracked, replaced by sheer astonishment. And this, I continued, pulling out the letter from Mr. Albright, is from my lawyer, confirming my sole ownership as stipulated by my late grandfather's trust. The trust that he set up specifically to prevent this exact situation. I let them absorb the blow. The irrefutable proof was laid bare. The spell of their authority was broken, shattered by a piece of paper they never knew existed. Sophie looked like she had been punched, her dreams of a debt-free medical education evaporating before her eyes. My father simply sagged, his bluster deflating as he sank onto the arm of the sofa. But my mother stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The full, shocking extent of her powerlessness had just been revealed, and she was not taking it well. The stakes had been escalated, and the case I had built was undeniable. The final showdown was about to begin. The living room, once a stage for my family's self-congratulatory drama, was now a silent, frozen tableau of shock. The real estate agent, Brenda, stood holding the deed, her expression a careful mask of neutrality, though her eyes darted between me and my parents. She was a professional caught in the crossfire of a family implosion, and she clearly wanted no part of it. It was my mother, Diane, who broke the silence. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss. "This is a trick," she said, her glare fixed on me. "A forgery. You think you can stop this with some fake paperwork." "It's not fake, Mom," I replied, my calm unwavering. "It's a legally executed trust, filed with the county. Mr. Albright has the original, if you'd like to call him. I'm sure he'd be happy to explain the terms of Grandpa's will to you, terms you were never meant to know." The mention of Mr. Albright, the family's long-standing and unimpeachable legal counsel, was a direct hit. My mother's desperate theory of forgery crumbled instantly. She knew, just as I did, that Mr. Albright's integrity was absolute. Brenda, the agent, cleared her throat, eager to extricate herself. "Well," she began, carefully placing the deed on the coffee table as if it were radioactive, "it seems there are some ownership issues to resolve here. My brokerage cannot, of course, proceed with any listing until the title is clear. I'll just see myself out." She gave a tight, apologetic smile and practically fled, closing the front door with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. We were alone now. The public humiliation phase was over. The private reckoning had begun. "I don't understand," my father, Richard, mumbled, his face pale and slack. He looked from the paper on the table to me, his mind struggling to process the new reality. "Robert, my own father-in-law, he went behind our backs." "Grandpa didn't go behind your back," I said, my voice softening slightly as I looked at him. "He protected me. He saw how you managed money, and he saw how you treated me versus how you treated Sophie. He wanted to make sure I would always have a foundation." At the sound of her name, Sophie finally spoke. Her voice was small and broken. "So it's yours, the whole house?" she asked, looking at me as if for the first time. "And you let us plan all this." "I let you show me who you really were," I said, the words sharp but true. I gave you every opportunity to consider me, to include me, to show me a shred of decency. You didn't. You celebrated the idea of kicking me out so you could have what you wanted. Tears began to stream down Sophie's face. They weren't the crocodile tears of a manipulator, but the genuine, shattering tears of someone whose entire worldview had just been invalidated. The golden child, for whom every door had been opened, had just run headfirst into a wall she couldn't charm or cry her way through. "So I can't go to school," she whispered. "You can go to school," I replied. "You'll just have to do it the way thousands of other students do. With scholarships, grants, and loans, you'll have to work for it, like I did." That was when my mother finally erupted. The shock had worn off, replaced by a towering rage. "You selfish, ungrateful child," she shrieked, taking a step toward me. "After everything we've done for you, we gave you a roof over your head." "A roof that, as it turns out, wasn't yours to give," I retorted, my own voice rising to meet hers. For the first time in my life, I didn't back down. "You didn't do me a favor. You were my tenants. You lived in my house, and you plotted to sell it out from under me for her?" I jabbed a finger toward Sophie. The raw truth of the statement silenced her for a beat. She stared at me, her chest heaving, her face contorted with a fury that was born of utter powerlessness. It was Sophie who made the final, decisive move. She stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked from our mother's furious face to my resolute one, and then at our father, who seemed to have shrunken into the sofa. A new expression was dawning on her face: realization. "She's right, Mom," Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm. "She's right. We were awful. We were so busy planning my future, we decided she didn't get to have one." She turned to me, her eyes filled with a shame that was more painful than any anger. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I am so sorry." That was the moment of climax. Not the screaming or the legal documents, but that. My sister, the golden child, finally seeing the truth. She had broken free from our mother's spell, not because of a document, but because of a moment of genuine, painful clarity. The showdown was over. I had won. The aftermath of the confrontation was a house filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. My mother, defeated and seething, retreated to her bedroom and slammed the door. My father remained on the sofa, looking lost and aged, as if the last hour had drained him of all vitality. Sophie, after her apology, had quietly gone to her own room, the sound of soft sobs echoing briefly in the hall. I stood alone in the living room, legal documents still sitting on the coffee table. The adrenaline that had fueled me began to recede, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a deep and abiding peace. The foundation my grandfather had wanted for me was secure. I had not just claimed my house, I had claimed my self-respect. The next few weeks were a painful but necessary transition. My mother refused to speak to me, treating me like an enemy occupier in her own home. My father was more sorrowful, offering me tentative, mumbled apologies when we crossed paths in the kitchen. He seemed genuinely remorseful, not just for the plan to sell the house, but for the years of neglect he had been complicit in. The biggest change came from Sophie. A few days after the showdown, she knocked on my bedroom door. Her eyes were puffy, but her expression was clear. "I withdrew my acceptance," she said quietly, "from that school." I was stunned. "Sophie, you didn't have to do that. I told you you could find other ways." "I know," she interrupted, "but it felt wrong. The whole thing was tainted by what we did. I've been looking at state schools, and I've been applying for every scholarship I can find. I also got a job. I'm going to save up for a year, work, and reapply. I need to do this myself." In that moment, I saw a strength in my sister I had never seen before. She was finally shedding the golden child persona and becoming her own person. It was the beginning of a real, authentic relationship between us. We started talking, truly talking, for the first time in our lives. She asked about my work with genuine interest, and I helped her with her scholarship essays. My mother's Cold War lasted nearly a month. The turning point came when Mr. Albright, at my request, sent my parents a formal letter. It wasn't an eviction notice, but a proposed rental agreement. It outlined a fair, below-market monthly rent they would have to pay if they wished to continue living in the house. It was a business proposition, clear and unemotional. Faced with the concrete reality of either paying rent to her disowned daughter or finding a new place to live, my mother finally broke. She appeared at my door one evening, her face etched with a weary resignation. "Is this really how it's going to be?" she asked. "This is how it is," I replied, not unkindly. "I own this house. You are welcome to stay, but it has to be on my terms." They signed the rental agreement. The first check they wrote to me was a monumental symbol of the new order. The financial and emotional power in our family had been permanently rebalanced. The antagonist's downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no financial ruin or public exile. It was quieter, more personal. My mother lost her iron-fisted control over the family. She had to learn to live in a house that wasn't hers, under a new set of rules defined by the daughter she had so thoroughly underestimated. Her dream of a prestigious doctor for a daughter was replaced by the reality of a daughter who was working at a coffee shop to save for a more modest education. It was a slow, grinding consequence, a daily reminder of her miscalculation. Months later, the house felt different. It felt lighter. It was truly mine. Sophie and I had rebuilt our sisterhood on a foundation of honesty. My father and I were slowly finding our way back to a real relationship. Even my mother's iciness had begun to thaw into a grudging respect. I sat in my office, my sanctuary, looking out the window at the garden I had saved. My grandfather had given me a house, but he had given me something far more valuable: the chance to stand my ground and fight for my own worth. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace.